Okay. We'll start with where we kind of left off. So, what's the panda principle again? The thumb. Okay, that's it. The thumb. So why aren't traits perfect?
Because they aren't, because then everybody would do the same thing. And there would be
That's another good reason. Exactly.
Because then there would be no mutations.
Yeah, besides, can you imagine?
That'd be so boring.
God.
There's a movie like that.
Yeah.
I just don't know what.
I think one of me is almost too much.
Same with me.
Yeah. So, okay. Anyway, so evolution can only work on traits, on variation that's already there, essentially. Now, new genes or new alleles are created, and sometimes they're, they have new functions, okay? But most are derived from what was already there. So in this case, there was a kind of a pre-existing sensory bias, and with the platyfish, and it turns out these guys right here, a female is still wildly smitten by a very long tail, even though the platyfish up here don't have one. So apparently novel things can have very strong effects that we kind of know. Okay, I started looking into this, the evolution of bioelectric adaptations. So people in here have probably heard of electric fish. Electric fish, they can perceive and create electric fields. Not all of them are strongly electric. Now, it turns out that the ability to actually detect bioelectric fields is really an ancient trait, or a primitive trait in vertebrates. In fact, it turns out in like teleos fishes, which are the bony fishes, it actually was lost in many of them, and then they evolved independently again. And then also, electric organs and their function evolved independently in a bunch of different lineages, including torpedo rays, electric skates. So these are cartilaginous fishes. Catfish, stargazers, South American knife fishes, and African marmiriform fishes. Now, it's interesting because there's a lot of convergent evolution going on here. If you actually look at the different kinds of fishes, the knife fishes and the African fishes, a lot of them look the same, function in the same niches, but they independently evolve these electric generating organs. At least that's what the phylogenies look like at this point. Now, some of these it's primarily used for like location, like echolocation, but it's been found that electrical these organs, these discharges, are actually very important in terms of mate choice. So females and males of many species give off different sounds, okay, or different electric fields. There's different kinds of fields, like this pulse versus waveform sorts of fields. They use them for different things, as I mentioned. So just like with bats and echolocation, A lot of these fish are in really cloudy water, or they really can't see all that well anyway. So they use these electric fields in much the same way that sonar or radar. And then, like I mentioned, it's also used in mate choice. It's also used in terms of territoriality, interactions between, let's say, rival males, all that kind of stuff. It's pretty amazing the kind of stuff that's been used for. Now, so there's two parts to this system. As I mentioned, the ability to detect bioelectric fields. That's an old trait. And in fact, there's still some, there's a number of different lineages where it's been maintained. But in terms of generating electric fields, that's, there's been independent origins. And these electric organs are usually made of muscle, but some are made of neural tissue, depending on where they evolved and what lineage. And they're essentially batteries. They look just like batteries. They're stacked just like batteries. They have ions, and they create these gradients that they use to actually generate electric fields. In fact, you look at our batteries, they work exactly the same way. It's amazing that we came upon this kind of a solution that nature has already used, and we weren't even really aware of it. At least I don't think so. So electrolocation, as I mentioned, electrocommunication, and then there's a few that are what are called strongly electric fishes that actually use it for predation or for protection. So electric eels, torpedo rays, a couple of others. There's a kind of a catfish that's very strongly electric that can give a pretty good jolt. But most of this bioelectric traits in fishes is actually weakly electric. They don't use it for predation. They use it mainly for communication and location effects. And they use it the way we use signals for everything. It's just another way of signaling that's been evolved, like sight and sound and all that kind of stuff. There's a go. Okay, now we can also, this is kind of how it works. In terms of the anatomy and physiology, they have these electroreceptors all around their body. Okay, a lot of them, at least in this elephant fish, they have the organ that actually emits the signal in the tail, and then of course they've got a central nervous system. There's changes in terms of hormones, in terms of when they're breeding and when they're not, as you would expect. And like I mentioned, there's differences between species, but there's also males and females often make different sounds, but they can recognize each other. They can also recognize each other's status. Okay. And essentially, here, let's look at this. Like any electromagnetic field, this is, just like you'd have an electromagnet, this is exactly the kind of field that it generates. So these are electric fields by electrical organ discharges emanating, and then here's this, let's say, electrolocation object where they can receive and find it, figure out exactly where they are. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a little bit about bats and, of course, marine mammals. They both use high-frequency clicks and sounds to actually use for location, echolocation, and also for communication amongst each other. So this evolved independently. In bats, of course, it's in the air, and in the air, sound doesn't really travel as well as in the water. So it turns out, I mean, in the water, it's like 4 to 5 times as efficient and as fast when dolphins use these high-frequency clicks to actually generate these soundscapes. Now, there, in addition to echolocation, some bats actually make sounds that discombobulate the moths that they're eating. These guys can actually stun fish on occasion. In fact, you often see them push fish up against the shore and then stun them, and the fish kind of all float to the top. So it's pretty, they have this thing called a melon that actually makes these sounds, and then they have receptors that come in from the jaw. And let's see. And then, as I mentioned, they communicate, but there's a feeling now that they're not communicating in sound. So when they use these things, let's say, to find where a moth is or where another fish is, what does that create? What is it more like than sound? Does it help them see? Let's put it that way. So these echolocations, does it actually help individuals see, in a sense? Well, that's what it is. In fact, there's a couple of people who've taught themselves, people who are blind, who've taught themselves to make clicks, and they can actually see and ride bikes, and it's amazing. Okay, so they generate kind of a visual soundscape. Now, there's been this question about whether dolphins and marine mammals can actually communicate, you know, in terms of with people. And they were thinking, well, they're pretty good mimics in certain cases. But there's a thought, actually, that what if the sounds are not really words to be listened to, but pictures to be seen? And so they're actually, because just think about it, they make a burst of these clicks, and not only can they hear it and see the soundscape, but also other members of their group. Okay? So they might actually be communicating with pictures, and it's been thought for a long time. I mean, we're so used to communicating with sound, right? But it's thought that with a lot of animals, they actually think in terms of pictures and not necessarily sounds. So, I mean, I don't know if that's actually true, but that's one of the hypotheses that's actually out there. And there's a couple of groups that are looking into it. It's a kind of a neat hypothesis, but I think they're just getting really started with it. Okay. So we were here earlier about antagonistic signaling or coevolution, camouflage and mimicry, sensory exploitation. So the femme fatale let's see. Let's go here. This is actually a firefly that eats other fireflies. It's a female, and she makes the same different colored, signals as the species that will draw a male in. Most of the males are the ones that are up on top, and the females usually lie in the grass, like snakes in the grass. So they use this signal, in a sense, to deceive these males into coming along and actually, getting eaten. The question is, well, we're going to get to this earlier about predation in the next chapter, but there's some hypotheses about why the males haven't actually evolved a counter defense. There's also, of course, female mimics that look and act like females. There's anglerfish that lure prey. Okay. And then, okay, so mimicry, illegitimate signalers deceiving a mark. There's orchids. Plants, actually, are communicating, of course, with animals as well. There's orchid mimic pheromones. There's some orchids that actually emit a pheromone that is just like the female wasp that they're mimicking. And in fact, it actually looks, if you look at the orchid plant, it looks like a female. And in fact, let me just bring it up. It's really pretty easy. So it actually turns out, though, that these males can learn. So when the mating season starts, of course, the plant blooms at the same time, same phenology. But it looks like that over the course of the breeding season, the males start to discern the difference between an actual female and an orchid female. Now, I mentioned earlier about the predatory firefly. And one of the theories we're going to get to the next chapter is called the net benefit theory. And that is, even though males lose their lives, it's still adaptive in terms of the number of males that actually can mate with females. So the losses aren't all that great. Now, obviously, a net benefit theory, hypothesis only works if the level of predation in this case, is fairly low. In other words, the benefits for actually going out and trying to find real females outweigh the actual cost of occasionally getting eaten by a female of this other species. So, what outcome would falsify the net benefit hypothesis? As we'll get to again in the next bit, but one of them is just safety in numbers. Okay, so it's not like you're necessarily in a group because you're all helping each other defend each other from whatever it is. It's just mainly there's a lot of you, and the level of actually losing, or the chance of actually losing your life is fairly small. Now, if there's a lot of predators around, or the losses are really high, then it'd be pretty easy to falsify that. In fact, what you actually see is you wouldn't really tend to see that. There'd have to be some other actual benefit to compensate for the losses. So there's some other. This is another bit of deception. Deception is such a huge thing in terms of communication. I mean, look at humans. we use deception even with the people we love. I mean, you know, usually tell, you know, your loved one that, oh, honey, you don't smell so good today, or something like that, right? Or, you know, you don't want to hurt their feelings, okay? And deception in nature is just rampant. And of course, it's kind of an antagonistic coevolutionary arms race. There's these beetles. They're called dung beetles. Anybody know what a dung beetle is? There's no ecologists in here? That's not good. Okay, so plants rely on a lot of animals to disperse their seeds. And a lot of animals, so plants make fruit, they make nuts and hard seeds that are then eaten, but there's enough of them so that there's some left over to germinate. Plants get animals to bury their seeds. Well, dung beetles come along and they collect the dung. In fact, they roll the dung of different animals, and they use it. They dig underground, they put it underground, it's a nest where they lay their eggs. Okay? And in the dung, oftentimes, there are seeds. In fact, the seeds actually require being buried for it to actually work in terms of the plant's fitness and getting dispersal surfaces. So if we look at vertical and side-by-side views of these C. argentinium seeds, as well as the one that has been cracked open, showing the endosperm and thick woody inner seed coat layer and all that. Now, scanning electron microscope, the outer shows all that kind of stuff. And then, let's see, we've got E is, no, F, where is F? Oh, F. Okay, it is, that's the dung beetle. These are feces on G, and then vertical and side views of another seed with a white eliosome. Okay, so that's what they're using. The thing is, what the argentinium seed is actually doing, this one, it actually looks like a piece of dung. And that's exactly how it's deceiving the dung beetle, because it's not a piece of dung. So, and it does this, it makes it attractive, so, you know, why can't the dung beetle differentiate between the dung that it really wants and the seed that it doesn't want? Because the dung beetles don't eat the seeds, okay? It's a byproduct of actually burying the dung. Well, the seeds emit the same sort of stench that the dung does, the same sort of volatile chemicals. In fact, there's so similarity in the composition of volatile blends of seeds and animal droppings is based on this, well, they did this multi-dimensional scaling, but so what it shows is, okay, these, the ones up here, where is it? Okay, so these guys right here, they emit the same sort of stench that old, let's see, eland, similar to eland and elephant is up there in terms of, so there's these, it's kind of, what's the name of it? Anyway, there's ways of looking at associations. And so it's actually showing you the kind of spectrograph in terms of volatile chemicals that are actually mimicking the smell of different kinds of dung. So let's see, eland and what else? Oh, Bontebok, another one. So that's actually how it's actually deceiving. Um, now, okay. HTTP. Okay. Then this one. Okay. Damn it. Oh, I know what it is. Never mind. And then, in terms of social communication, we're going to get to this in a bit, but there's honest signals, right? So this is Zahavi's handicap principle, and the thing is, there's actually a lot of times animals have what are called low-cost badges of status. So here we have this sparrow on the left. We also have these wasps, and it's not very difficult or very expensive to actually make these symbols. So you would expect, well, if low-status males could actually look just like a high-status male, how come it evolved that way? Well, they seem to know their place because, let's say the hypothesis is that you can paint, let's say, a low-status male to make him look just as good as a high-status male. Very simple. And if that's the case, then they should both get equal numbers of copulations, or they should get, in terms of territoriality, the same sort of effects with other males. But it turns out that that's really not the case. Even though it is a low-cost status symbol, in other words, it's not really much of a handicap, but if a low-status male actually looks like a high-status male, the high-status male will come along and actually beat the crap out of it. Okay? So there's, we think of handicaps like a thing that has a heavy cost, whether it's predation or providing food to a low-status individual, all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of there's what's called an index in terms of hierarchy and status. And one of them, I'll give you a good index. There's not that many people who can actually dunk a basketball. And you really can't cheat that, can you? I mean, as much as I want to cheat it and look just like Michael Jordan, it's just never going to happen, right? So instead of the handicap principle, and obviously being able to dunk a basketball is not a handicap, but it's an index of, let's say, fitness. For the same way that, let's say, it's an honest signal. So individuals who can't dunk a basketball don't get the same fitness benefits that ones who do, right? So they're like low-cost badges of honor. They don't really cost very much. Well, obviously they cost a lot. An individual has to be able to do that to get away with it, but it's something that's not invadable by anyone else.